Well, it's a minute after noon, everyone, and I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you again for being here today. It's a pleasure to be back. I was here last Friday, and we had a great session, and I hope that you enjoy what I'm sharing with you today. Last Friday, it was painting. Today, it's poetry. Again, this poetry was inspired by my trip to Ghana in May of 2019. And I've written two to share with you today. And I'll give you just a little bit of background for each of them. The first one is entitled Ebony, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about why I wrote it. So, next slide. So, when I got to Ghana, one of the feelings that I really experienced right off the bat was this sense of community, this feeling that everyone was responsible to and responsible for each other. And with that came this sense of confidence. I saw the people interacting with one another. They were looking each other directly in the eyes. Whereas sometimes in the United States, depending on where you are, you don't want to meet somebody's eyes. You look down or look away so as not to call attention to yourself. I didn't see that there. And when I saw interactions with the police, which were present, not often, but I did see them, there were these easygoing interactions between the citizens and the police. I rarely heard any sirens. There was just an overwhelming feeling of peace while I was there. And so, next slide, I wanted to think about, well, what is that? And I don't know exactly what it was, but what I interpreted it to be is perhaps this is what it must feel like when you have always been part of the majority, part of what is considered the norm. Um, Little things I noticed, like going to the grocery store in Ghana, and the hair care products that I would use were front and center. They weren't in a corner on a row by themselves. They were everywhere, because this was what happens when you are the majority. I kept wondering, what is that? And I thought about how um, this group of people that I was watching, their parents, their grandparents, their great grandparents had always experienced this thing of being the majority. And it seemed to be something that came from a people that had not been broken. And I don't quite know what that is. Next slide. But I did begin to think about, I wonder, what does that feel like? What if Black was the default? What if that was the norm? Who would I have been if my parents, if my grandparents, if my great grandparents had always been in the majority? Who would they have been? Who would we have? And so that was the impetus for this poem that I wrote entitled Ebony, that I will read for you now. Next slide. Her skin is like midnight, and plump are her lips. Thick are her thighs, and she's got swing in her hips. I'll edit her down, the white photographer quips. She was more, she is more, but what more might she be if in prints of all kinds she could say, I see me, if her conceptions of beauty began in ebony? Walk with me, husband says, they'll take me more kindly. I stop, I meet his eyes, and I feel his sincerity. So we enter, we inquire, but the white man speaks just to me. My husband was more, he is more, but who more might he be if he traded in markets of familiarity, if the community faces were in ebony? The plan she designs outwits rival quests. With no fear, she speaks and stuns all the guests. But the clients dismiss as though she is less. She was more, she is more, but how more might she be if in a network of thinkers who look like family, if her career had begun in accomplished ebony? Black is a proud stride, a straight back, a direct look in the eye, no concept of inner lack. It's moving here and there with assurance and ease and owning the spaces and holding the keys. It's no limitations according to skin tone or the sound of our speech or the body we own. Not that success can only be found if blackness alone in this world did abound, but lost between somewhere and our home of ago are assumptions of worth and the value we know to be rightfully ours as God intended. But uprooted and broken, our worth was upended. Ghanaian like confidence and strength suspended. Black as default is offensive to some who say it disrupts this idea that we're one. But offense, I believe, is most easily embraced by those who see in most others their face. To flip the script, I respectfully suggest might put that we're one idea to a real test. His chubby brown hand shoots up. Without pause, he shouts his response out loud because he knows the answer. He just wants to please. But inside, his little heart drops to his knees as he finds once again his placement outside. Now, brewing inner rage sets in to reside. And not yet mature, he has no words to tell of how school has for him become first grade hell. What more could he be? Who more should he be? How more would he be if his learning world reflected his identity and normalized and dignified his ebony? Now, I'd like to tell you that those scenarios that I wrote about, and there were four in that poem, one of them never happened to me directly. Things that I read about, things that I've read about models being edited for print. And so I know that many of us have heard of that before. Another incident that I wrote about in that poem didn't happen to me directly, but it happened to people that I know of, women in particular who have gone into corporate America and shared their ideas and shared what they knew and were experts about. But ideas were not accepted because of who they were. One of the incidences actually did happen to me, and that's where my husband and I went to a car repair shop. We were looking for a particular part for our car, and we found that this place near Fair Park had the part, and it was owned by this guy, and I won't call his name. We went there, and when we got to the place, we recognized that even though it was in the Fair Park area, which is an area that we know fairly well, we were very unfamiliar with this area. We saw that the owners and the workers there were white, and I started to stay in the car. And my husband said to me, why don't you come on inside with me? They'll treat me better if you're with me. He said it so casually, and he said it so matter of factly, um, it startled me. And so I looked in his face and I thought, he's serious. So I got out of the car and I went with him. But I was extra sensitive to what might happen when we got in there. And when we did, my husband began to speak and he said, "Hey, I'm Johnson Price. This is my wife. And I'm looking for," and he began to tell what he was looking for, described it to a T. And when he did that, the man listened to what my husband said, but then he turned his face and directed all of his explanation, all of his commentary, all of his services to me, as if my husband were not standing there and had not initiated that conversation. And then the last one that I wrote about, the little boy, being an educator, I'm very aware of the inequities that exist in education. And I've been a part of schools in the past and have seen it happen over and over again, where our Black children are set outside of the classroom for calling out or for something that probably could have been handled in the classroom. And so those incidences inspired me to write that poem after I had been to Ghana and experienced what it must feel like to be the majority all the time. The second poem that I'm going to share with you, I wrote at the end of the trip to Ghana. And those last couple of days we were there, we didn't want to leave. So on the last full day that we were there, Dr. Dillard said to us, "What I want you to do before we leave, before we spend our last night here, I want you to go around our property here. And I want you to find things, objects that you can use that will help you write and tell about what this experience has meant to you. So she left us to do this for about 2 hours. And so we went all over the property. And the property was actually her home. She has a home there where she sponsors these retreats. And so there are 8, 9 rooms in the home. And so all of us stayed there. It's a beautiful place. And so as I walked around the property, I found several things. But the biggest thing that I found was this set of broom bristles without the broom part, without the handle. So that's the large collection of stalks that you see on the left-hand side. And I wanted to use that to represent the people who are currently living in Africa. But I also wanted to represent people who were living in the United States. So I took some of those individual stalks out and I made another cluster. But the other cluster that I made was mixed with other things. And in particular, they were mixed with straws. I found some straws in the kitchen. I took each one of those stalks and I threaded them through each of the straws. And then, if you'll notice, the large cluster on the left stands on its own, and it didn't need any help. I just stuck it there, and it stood very solidly. And I put it on top of a mat, and that mat was a woven tapestry in my mind. But back over to the smaller cluster, these straws had the stalks running through them, and that group would not stand unless they were standing together. So they had to be together because it was a much more fragile thing for them to be there that way. And then I threaded the two together with some twine that I found. And so this poem that I'm going to read is called Identity. The only home I've known is all I thought I owned. And some people there look like me. Histories tell us that misfortunes befell us and we were stolen to this country. Torture they'd wield so Black people would build this paradox, land of the free. Little could one guess how our impact would rest in all America would be. The few stalks that appear are Black people living here, my family, friends, my relations. And as for the others, few think of the significant links that connect us, but they are mistaken. A look at the case makes the strong case that without us, the US would fall. Yet many raped us and tried to erase us. Our blood runs through nearly all. The majority is born thinking they're the norm and hold the power to judge real beauty. And at times it's hard to endure the disregard for our talent, our intellect, and our ingenuity. But an invisible twine of green light, a bloodline, connects us to the land of our birth, where all people there are descendants and heirs of majesty, value, and worth. From our feet to our heads, with royalty we tread the ground on which I believe is woven the cloth of majesty wrought, the lineage of kings and queens. When thinking of home, I now know I own much more than where I reside. For I was born of a land that God always had planned had been my place of royal ancestry and pride. And that's the second poem and the end of the two that I wanted to share with you today. And so I'm going to open the floor for conversation, what you felt when you heard those poems, and anything that you would like to share. And you're welcome to turn your mics on. That's what I had to remind people today. We are kind of a small group today. We had a larger group before, but we're kind of a small group today. So if you turn your mics on, I think that would be just fine.
So how long have you been writing, Dr. Price?
So I've written poetry intermittently for as I can remember. I didn't start saving my poetry until I guess maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So tragically, some of the poems that I wrote many years ago, I have no idea where they are because they were very easily, coming to my mind. I would jot them down and then I would lay it somewhere thinking, oh, that's nothing. That's just something I did one day. And it probably was about 4 or 5 years ago that I thought I probably need to start saving these. And so that's when I began to actually save them and go back and reminisce and maybe edit now and then. Um, I've been painting consistently longer than I have been writing poetry consistently, but the poetry still comes to me and it comes to me kind of easily.
That's great. Thank you.
What things did you think of as you listened? So I'm interested to hear what did they make you think of? What thoughts came to mind as you heard perhaps some of the incidences in my first poem where, there's an elementary child stuck outside, um, editing down the model, the man speaking to me instead of my husband, disrespecting him. What kinds of things came to mind? Oh, thank you, Dr. Hill. I appreciate that. And yes, that is my dad on the line. So, Dad, would you wave your hand? That's my father. They see you. His name is James Smith, and that's my father.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. Dr. Price, I would like to thank you for your presentation and your work. It's very compelling. Um, my roots lie in Ivory Coast, and Ivory Coast is a neighboring country right next to Ghana on the right side. The difference between both countries, they have the same culture, everything is the same. The only difference is the language, um, the official language, because Ghana was colonized by Britain and Ivory Coast was colonized by France. So
Mm,
in Ivory Coast, the language that everybody speak there, in addition to the local languages, is French, and in Ghana is English. That's the only one difference. Both countries before the colonizer came in, it was the same people before the divide, like Africa as a piece of cake and divide and conquer Africans. Um, your work with the broom is interesting and compelling because it's what I've been trying to explain. When I moved years back, I moved to the US. Um, I was shocked with the culture, not only the overall culture, but mainly the culture within the Black community. Because, like you saw and you experienced in Ghana, it's mainly the way of living of all the Africans in the sub-Sahara, which is Black Africa, because North Sahara is white Africa mainly. Also, we have white Africans in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and other countries. But Sub-Sahara is mainly Black Africa. So over there, like you saw, we put great pride and accent on leaving one, the way your broom stains, the black, the darker broom. And then the other way, what I discovered here in America, the community, the way the community lives is completely different from the way we live in Africa. Like you saw
mhm,
in Ghana, everyone is auntie, everyone is uncle. If there is a
mhm,
child in the community, it's not the business of the mother and the father alone. It's the entire community raising that child. And I couldn't see this here. And
Right.
it hurts because seeing those young Black kids doing whatever they want and being, I mean, they don't take into account what another adult would tell them unless it's the parent. I could
Mm-hmm.
not understand that. But
Mm-hmm.
spending so many years here, now I understand. I'm still learning my African American heritage because my
Mm-hmm.
life is here now.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
also part of my
Thank you
African
for
heritage. Yes.
thank you so
So
much for sharing that, because I have wondered if my feeling that I had when I got there, I wondered, is this actually real, or is it something that was just my perspective coming from where I live and visiting there? But it's actually confirming and affirming to hear you say that the community that I felt there was a real phenomenon, and that when you came here, it felt much different. So I
yeah,
appreciate that. Thank you so much.
it's real. You got it right. This is the way of living in Africa. And usually in a neighborhood, one person business is everybody's business. I mean,
Uh huh.
I mean, like, if somebody's happy, the entire community is happy. If there's something wrong, like a bad event like a death or illness, whatever, it's everybody's business. This is how Africans survive. Because,
Mm-hmm.
like I will always say, Africa an extremely rich, and I will say it, is the richest continent on earth. However, because of the exploitation of the colonizer, although it states that African countries are free, but going in finances and economic, they are not free. So they do live on their riches. So Africa is where you will find a lot of people struggling financially and
Mm-hmm.
even
Mm-hmm.
living in poverty and below poverty line. So
Mm-hmm.
people live together, helping each other so they can survive. And I wish we had this here as a Black community. What I experienced and I continue to experience, most of the time, what people would tell me is, you don't belong.
Oh, wow. I
Yeah.
see a question that someone wrote that says, Dr. Price, what do you think that we could do to try and bring the support and love to DC? That came from Ms. Varner. Can you tell me a little bit more about that question a little bit?
Well, I mean, you talked about, how everybody was there supporting and loving. So my question was, what do you think, above and beyond the AAERG group that we have, could possibly be done to bring us together as a family of support for one another here within the Dallas Colleges system?
That is a profound question, a deep question. I don't know that I have that answer, but I do know that our AARG is a start. Um, Never before then had we had a group. For instance, when the AARG, and Alicia, would you tell the group a little bit more about AARG, just a little bit before I answer that question?
Well, I think most of the people on here are part of the group, but however, I will explain it. AAERG is the African American Resource Group for the Dallas College, which I've become recently a part of. And it's basically a group where we try to provide resources for one another and support in any way we can, and also bring things of such nature as the new Black History Month that we presented to you guys for
Mhm.
employees. So it's all about
Mhm.
employees at this moment with the AAERG.
Right. And recently, well, I've been a part of that group now just since this semester, and I'm learning more about how the group operates. Glad to be a part of that group. I do know that once when I joined in the middle of one of the sessions, I did feel a sense of community among that group. There were some who were testifying and praying and lifting one another up. And it was a familiar feeling that I thought, oh gosh, this is a place where I feel like I belong, and and I feel like I can connect with the people in this group. I'd like to see more of that. And so I do know, that question that came. I know this is going to take quite a bit of time for us to develop a culture that operates instinctively like that, because instinctively, I don't know that we have that ability to want to connect with others in that way. So I hope that we can continue. I hope that continues to grow. Said, countering the conspiracy to destroy Black boys floated through my mind in your first piece. Exactly. I did feel that specifically when I wrote that last stanza about the little boy, because no matter what school I've visited, no matter what school I've worked in, no matter what school I've been connected to, I have seen instances of that kind of thing happening. And there's no secret behind that. Lots of research has been written about the school to prison pipeline. And so that was really heavy on my mind when I wrote that piece, that part of that poem. Are there times when a poem has inspired a painting or vice versa? Usually it kind of goes hand. I have not written a poem and then decided to do a painting because of that poem. It just kind of always happens together. Um, and then the two that I just wrote today, that I read for you today, painting was not the first thing that came before the poetry. The poetry came first. Thank you so much. How do we balance the romanticism of the unknown with the facts and reality of each country? Oh my goodness. Dr. Hill, that's a deep, deep question. I'll invite you to chime in so that we can answer that one together. Yeah, there is some romanticism in that. I don't live in Africa. I don't have that African experience that is a day to day experience. And so I'm quick to tell everyone that when I wrote the poems that I did, what I was expressing was my initial response when I was there. One of our guests shared already that there's a lot of poverty and there's a lot of things that need to be solved in Africa, and I don't discount any of those. But I can say that my initial reactions when I got there was what inspired me to write the poetry that I did.
Thank you for your response. I was really struck by your poem, Ebony, and your statement of Black as default. And what?
Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. What really struck me was a commonality that I shared as growing up in New York. I actually experienced being having the default and Black as the default, and my childhood was surrounded by Blackness. We actually had partied the police department in our neighborhood, both in New York as well as in Georgia, in a little small town that my great grandfather was from. And it was empowering, as you say. I never knew what the fuss was about until I got to college. And you, of course, as my college roommate across the hall, experienced some of the contrasts that I experienced. And that was really eye-opening to understand that I wasn't the default when I got to college and integrated. And contrast that was undergraduate, but contrast that with going to graduate school in Virginia State in a historically Black college. And it was, as you say, wonderfully empowering to be surrounded by Black intellectual capital. And the experience was valuable. So that poem really struck me and resonated with me. But I do want to ask you, about how do we balance the goodness between both continents. That I think that we sometimes visit other countries and we're so enamored with what could have been, what should have been, that it can color our experiences. It can color our output. What is your response to that in your Ghanaian experience?
The work is not done. You know, this work will never be done as long as we have a society where one group of people is not considered from the beginning as equal. You know, we now are still talking about the remnants of redlining, you know, where our country was built from the beginning, where it was never meant to be equal from the very beginning. As long as we are not dealing with that head on, the work will never, ever be done. So I don't know that it's possible to completely reconcile those two, because that to me would mean the work is finished. And I don't see to that work. Would love other people chime in. And I know we are running out of time. It's 12:30, but that is a deep thought that we can continue to pursue. Anyone else want to chime in on that one? I don't believe the work will be done for a very, very, very long time. Let me go back to my chat. Okay. Okay, y'all. It's 12:33. I think we've reached the end of our conversation, although I know it could